They did well, Mike, I think. I don't think they got what they were looking for. They were looking for a surefire, franchise-changing prospect as the centerpiece of it. But considering the fact that when you got down to the end, there really was no team interested in Cole that needed to do this now, to win this year, giving them very little leverage, I really think that this worked out well. Alfaro, the catcher, this is a guy who has a chance, at least, to be a star. I had a scout tell me that he's the best catching prospect he's seen in 20 years. Now, he's raw. He's a work in progress in a lot of ways. He's hurt right now. If he hadn't been hurt, you could probably have seen him next year. Now, that's probably a stretch to think he's ready to compete for that job in spring training, depending on how you want to go. But he's a real difference-making player. Jake Thompson is a guy with a big arm and big upside, and that you can't have enough of those guys around. Now, he's another guy. He's raw. There's a way to go there, but another really good, a good get, I would say, considering their situation. And Nick Williams, what a great story. This kid drives 2,000 miles, goes right to the ballpark, and then the next day he's getting 4 hits in a game in Trenton. Pretty cool, right? And I've seen Nick Williams. I saw him in the Futures game, and he actually physically has that Ken Griffey Jr. look. Now, he's not going to hit 600 homers, but he's a really talented guy. And all 5 players should play in the big leagues if they stay healthy. So I don't know. Could you do much better than that considering the situation?
Well, and that's a great question because, some would say, well, they didn't get the best 2 prospects in Texas, but they got a volume amount. And I guess the question originally was, is it a failure that you didn't get one of the top 2, but you got 5 guys that might make the majors? It sounds like that's a good enough haul for whoever made the deal. Most likely Pat Gillick. Who does it smell like to you made this deal? Because I remember talking to you the week before, and we said they're looking for yesteryear's prices. Isn't this almost a yesteryear type trade where they got essentially 6 for 2, but 5 for 1, really, when you look at prospects for major league talent?
Yeah, in some ways it is. Now, they used money to get themselves more players back, and that's what you should do. We can talk about the money aspect of it later, but the thing, I think the question you're asking me is who made this deal? And yeah. I know Ruben went out and said, this is the way I've always made deals. Really? It's not quite what I've heard. It sounds to me like this was Ruben and Pat Gillick and Andy McPhail collaborating with Scott Profrock there to help work the money moves. And basically those 3 guys or 4 guys made this deal as a group. And if you look at the history of the kind of deals that Pat Gillick has made and Andy McPhail has made, you can see their imprint all over these. And if Ruben wants to take the credit, good for him. If they want to give him credit, good for them. But this was a group effort.
Well, and if Ruben is taking the credit or getting the credit, is this a good enough deal that he says to them in the offseason, hey, I was a big impact on this deal. It's a good deal. I should stick around.
I'm sure that's Ruben's vote no matter what happens. And look, Andy was certainly watching. Andy's been gathering intelligence, watching very carefully, definitely putting his 2 cents in. But I don't think we can read anything into this. Seriously, anything. I know people have been trying to read into the fact that when the smoke cleared and Ruben had made 3 deals, it was Ruben Amaro that trotted up there to the podium all by himself. And trying to read into that, I really disagree. I've seen Pat at work for way too long, and I remember very well, just as recently as 2008, it was his last year as general manager. Everybody knew it. And when there were moves, when there were transactions, when the general manager was supposed to talk, there were times he sent Mike Arbuckle to the podium. There were times he sent Ruben Amaro up there to answer the questions. And that's just Pat's style. And I think basically this was Pat's way of saying, Ruben's the GM, Ruben should answer the questions. But I really wouldn't read too much into it beyond that. Andy's doing a lot of watching, observing, talking to people. It sounds like he may have made some contact with some candidates. There's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Jayson Stark, the Stark Report here on 97.3 ESPN as we take a look at some of the things the Phillies did. So they traded Papelbon, they traded Hamels, they made that move for Revere. Keith Law was on yesterday's show. He really liked what they did, but really talked about the depth they now possess in the farm system. How different is this farm system than it was back in April?
Well, I think if I would go back a year, because you have to include the deals they've made over the winter, and they've obviously greatly increased the depth of their system and the number of big league type prospects in their system, and had to do that. I guess my one reservation about what they've done and where they need to go is this is not just about depth. It's not just about bringing players who can play in the big leagues. You got to compete with the Nationals and the Mets and the Braves and the Marlins. When you consider the young talent that those teams have assembled, the Phillies have a ways to go. I used this stat on Twitter the other day. It attracted a ton of attention. To beat the Mets over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I don't know how many number one starters you would need, but just the current state of the Mets, right, with Steven Matz really barely pitching this year and Zach Wheeler out for the year. Mets starting pitchers, just their starters, have thrown more than 2,500 pitches this year at 95 miles an hour or faster. Wow. Phillies starting pitchers have thrown 22 pitches at 95 miles an hour or faster, and all 22 of them were thrown by guys who are no longer here.
Wow.
Cole Hamels threw all but 5 of them, and 14 were just in that no-hitter alone. And then Philippe Beaumont and Dustin McGowan combined for the other 5. None of those 22 pitches thrown by a pitcher currently on the roster. And I guess my point is they need difference makers. They need guys to slot in at the top of that rotation who, when you face the Mets, when you face Jose Fernandez, when you face the Nationals with Scherzer and Giolito and whoever else they slot behind them, who's going to match up with those guys? So that's the next assignment. And, the thing to remember, though, is good chance they're going to have a pretty high draft pick, don't you think?
I would assume so. They have played better baseball, but they are still a distance away from the next team in front of them. Jayson Stark with us. All right, the Utley thing I find interesting. Is there a better chance that Utley is traded or back with the Phillies next year?
Could be both, but I think he gets traded. I think they would like to trade him. We don't know what's going to happen when he comes back, how he's going to play. We don't know what's shake out when he goes through waivers, who's going to claim him, whether anybody claims him. It certainly limits their ability to make a deal. There's a lot of speculation about this. Everybody knows they want to trade him. But there is interest. You've heard the Cubs, that's real. Heard the Angels, that's real. Heard the Yankees, no doubt they have interest. The Giants would have been interested if Joe Panik had been out for a while. They're going to have a chance to trade him. What they need him to do is show he can still play. Their team's definitely willing to buy that lottery ticket and say, hey, if we put Chase Utley in a race, we got something. So the rest is up to him. I think I told you the last time we talked that, Chase apparently feels like the Phillies misdiagnosed the injury, and that when they showed him the test results, he wanted to shut it down immediately, go to work on that area that had really never been addressed and never healed. And he thinks right now he's a different guy than what we saw for 3 months. Well, if he is, you can definitely move him. If he's not, I'm not sure.
They had originally said, Jay, that Hernandez has earned the right to play. Now they're saying they're going to play Utley about 4 days a week. Do you owe it to Utley to showcase him? Is it not fair to Hernandez? Is this a tough spot that Pete's in?
Well, it is, but it's necessary. I asked Pete about it, and Pete's going to make sure that he gets Cesar Hernandez in there 5 or 6 days a week minimum. And so the way this is going to work is Chase might play second 2 or 3 games a week and maybe first base a game or 2 a week. Cesar Hernandez might play 4 or 5 games at second base, play some short, play some third, play some center, play wherever they need him to play. It's not ideal, I think they really like what's happened since he's settled in at second base. But if you want to trade Chase, the only way to trade him is to make sure he gets on the field. And it's a challenge for the manager. But one of the things that you'll notice, Mike, is that Pete Mackanin mentioned that he had talked to everyone this could affect. And it just shows you one of the big differences between him and Ryan Sandberg. A lot of these type situations were left unexplained under the previous regime. And Pete's such a good communicator that he gets guys to buy in.
Which brings up the obvious follow-up then. Is he inching himself closer to being a legitimate candidate, or do the Phillies owe it to themselves to go outside the organization and look around? Is Pete becoming a candidate?
I think he certainly put himself in the conversation. As one of their guys said to me, if you look at what the roster is going to be next year, these are going to be the players, right? We're going to be here with a few exceptions. And the fact that Pete took a team that was headed for 110 losses and has them playing almost at 500 is amazing. They're 13-5 since the break. They'd won 13 of their previous 52, right? So I think it's premature to speculate about any of this a whole lot. We don't know who's going to even make the decision. We don't know who the general manager is going to be. It's just there's a lot of time and a lot of games and a lot of stuff to sift through. But how could you not at least consider Pete Mackanin now? The other thing to remember, the last time he was an interim manager with the Reds, and I believe it was 2007, they were 20 games under 500 when he took over and had a winning record the rest of the year.
And we were talking about this before you came on, Jay, is that this team was 30-plus games under 500. They were outscored at one point by 152 runs. The next closest team was 81. Is that indicating that Sandberg was that bad of a manager, or is this indicating that Mackanin is really doing a good job?
Look, talent was a big part of this, and I think it's still going to be an issue over the last 2 months. But I think what we've learned is that the manager had a negative effect on this team until he quit. It couldn't be more clear. If you've watched them play since Pete Mackanin took over, it's really night and day in a lot of different ways. Communication, big difference. Just running the game, ease of running the game, seeing ahead when you run the game, putting people in the right place. Pete Mackanin had managed 2,000 games before he took over, and it shows, doesn't it? It really shows.
Yeah.
And then the final thing is, he's created with his personality and his style an atmosphere that's enabled guys to thrive and relax and not wonder all the time what the heck the manager was thinking. And I don't know where this is going to lead, and I like Ryan Sandberg a lot personally, but I think it was obvious he really wasn't cut out to manage the big leagues. Just didn't have what it takes to run the game and run the clubhouse. And when you see a guy come in, even as an interim, and run it the way it's been run, it just points that out even more.
Yeah, and it's interesting because yesterday we were talking about the new trend of managers who have no experience. A guy like Matt Williams, and as Keith Law quoted, has managed them out of first place. It's not an easy job just to come in, be a baseball guy, and know how to be a baseball manager. It doesn't seem that is automatically something that goes hand in hand. I'll leave you with this one, Jay. Dominic Brown, obviously, everybody has kind of written him off. He has gotten hot the last couple of weeks. Are the Phillies resigned to giving him another shot, or have they given up on him?
I would say neither one quite describes it. They have to play him to find out what he is. They have to play him to see if he can establish some kind of trade value. But do you think they really believe that he's somebody you build around? I don't see that. I think this probably has saved him from getting non-tendered after the season, because he's about to get expensive, and he might have created some trade value for himself. Now, remember, up until this past homestand, he had hit one home run the whole season in the minor leagues and major leagues, and then he hit 3 in this homestand. And I'll be interested to see where this leads, but you're finally starting to see some semblance of the stroke that made this guy an all-star, and it's about time.
You're right. 3 homers, 13 RBI in his last 9 games. It's feel like a guy who was completely out of the plans, and now in a season where you might just say, you know what do we got to lose? Let's just see if he can build on this. That's something else to watch. We got a lot to watch all of a sudden. Nola's up. You got a lot of young talent in the minors. I feel like there's maybe, Jay, just a little switch that people have a little bit more interest. I was in Clearwater. It was just not the same. People just seemed like they didn't care. Maybe that is starting to change a little bit. We'll see. And, of course, we'll talk to Jay next week here on the Sports Bash 97.3. A lot of good stuff post-deadline, Jayson. Have a great weekend, pal.
Mike, thanks. You won't talk to me next week, though. I'm on vacation. Save up all your
I take vacation. You get vacation, too. Fair. All right, bud. Take care.
Thanks, man. Have a great weekend.